By the time you get to high summer, round about July, there's a peculiar sort of feeling in your garden. I don't like to say it too loud, but it's kind of quiet relaxation. All that work you've put in is finally paying off. It's all happening. It's the horticultural equivalent of a firework party. You do your planning in winter, you lay them out in spring, you light the blue touch paper, and at this time of year, you stand back and let it all happen. Well, almost. The display started in earnest with cottage-style plants that ran from May well into late June. And now, in July, herbaceous perennials are in full swing and looking their best for the next couple of months. Across the country, houses like these will be flinging open their gates for folks to admire fantastic traditional borders. So is high summer a time for swanning around with a glass of Pimm's, for going and looking at other people's gardens, for taking a bit of a holiday from it all, safe in the knowledge that when you come back it will still be looking lovely? Well, up to a point, yes. But as we know, this is gardening, and pretty soon there'll be just a whiff of gunpowder and everything will turn black. So that's a lot of what high summer gardening's about. Relaxing and finding ways to keep the display stretching on later into the year. So here in our garden, we'll be supplementing our mixed border with some later flowering plants, keeping an eye on the new patio bed, and having a good look at the cottage borders. They were amazing in June, as cottage beds hopefully are, but, well, they're definitely on the way down now. But just because they've peaked doesn't mean it's curtains for them. You can imbue them with new vigour, new life and new flowers if you're prepared to be brutal. Wield your shears now at the beginning of July, and plants like Alchemilla mollis and geraniums will kickstart back into action. I know it looks hugely cruel, but there's method in my madness. You see, by removing the faded flowers and the seeds they're trying to form, I encourage them to think, oh crumbs, we better do something about that. We've just lost our flowers and our seeds, better make some more. And most of them will. I know it doesn't look pretty the moment you've done it, but at this time of year it'll be just a couple of weeks before it's filled in again, and then all little flowers will start to come, honest. But you don't just have to rely on cutting things back and patience to revive a tired cottage border, because not all flowering stars need to shoot up and bloom quite so early. There is one cottage garden plant that can extend your season of colour. It's a bit of an unsung hero that deserves to be much more popular. Phlox. It's a classic perennial that can pick up the flowering baton from delphiniums and the like and run with it to produce flowers right into July and beyond. It sits equally well in the cottage border or among more exotic plants. And if you've a tiny garden and need to lengthen your display, well, if you cut down half of the stems on each clump in late May, you'll find that you get a second, later flush of flowers, which extends the season of interest even further. One of the reasons they fell out of favour was that they were martyrs to mildew, you know, that white powder deposit you get on the leaves. But modern varieties are much more vigorous, and if you grow them in really rich soil, it shouldn't be a problem. For me, they're tremendously valuable plants, not just because of their wide range of colours, but because they flower between those early summer June bloomers and the ones that haven't quite come in August. They're a gap filler, but a class gap filler. So having stretched out the colour in the cottage border, it's our mixed one that needs the attention now. It's brand new this year, and so far it's a mixture of grasses, shrubs and herbaceous perennials, which are small but on their way. The shrubs are making a really good backdrop, as shrubs do. The grasses are softening the whole effect with those airy waving tassels, and this was a border that was designed to come into its own in mid to late summer, which is what it's doing. Right now it's the herbaceous perennials like this achillea and heleniums who are giving the first splash of colour, but as we know they won't last forever. So I've left some gaps between the planting to accommodate something I made earlier. Back in March, on those days when it was too cold and wet to do anything in the garden, I potted about in the greenhouse, planting up cannas and dahlias. And baby, look at them now. These two come from tropical bits of America and Asia originally, so it's only now that our soil and air is warm enough for these exotic and delicate beauties. Giving such latecomers bed space in your garden does demand good planning. They need gaps to be left. They need potting up early and an appropriately warm start in life. I bought my first dahlia plants growing when I was about 14. And because you can't put them out until the frosts are past, and this was up in Yorkshire, so it was kind of middle of June, I kept them on the downstairs radiator in the hall. By the time I planted them out, they were about 3 feet tall. These are much better, stocky, just starting to flower. What's astonishing about dahlias and cannas, though, is how fast that exotic foliage grows once they're out here and happy. They'll pay you back tenfold for all that nursing early on, and actually, they're not looking bad now. Already, they're making a difference. The border seems to be sitting up and going, ping! That luscious foliage really is making a difference, giving it a tropical flavour, and those flowers will keep coming right the way through the summer. Now, if you're thinking of heading off to that deck chair, don't do it just yet. With really fast-growing hedges like privet and that tiny little evergreen-leaved honeysuckle, you can cut them twice a year, once in spring, you know, May, June, and again in summer. But with things like beech and yew that take the time to put on those stems, the best thing to do, frankly, is to wait until now, late summer. Cut them now and they'll stay crisp-formed right the way through the winter. Unlike the dahlias and cannas, most plants in your garden are slowing down now in terms of growth. That's why hedges will stay looking sharp. I do love the gentle sound that shears make, but if you've got a run of hedge as long as this one, then you probably want to go for something faster. And don't be tempted with a new hedge to let it grow until it reaches the right height before you get your shears or your trimmers out. If you do, it'll just be gappy and bare down below. Of course, what you achieve with all this clipping is a bush which is a perpetual adolescent. There are no old stems on the outside because you keep cutting them back and new young ones keep coming. But just like pinching out a pot plant, it encourages side shoots to grow, and that means you get a thicker, denser hedge as a result, and one that's ever young. It's very satisfying knowing how a plant will react to pruning or similar, and then using that reaction to make your garden better. And it's just as well, as gardeners need all the tricks we can get. One of the first lessons you learn in gardening is that you're creating a totally artificial environment. You're taking plants from bogs, from prairies, from jungles,
putting them all together and expecting him to do well.
Making that mix work is half the challenge, but some combinations are more demanding than others.
Hanging baskets. Not only are plants from the four corners of the earth grouped together here, but they're jammed into a shallow saucer, then hoisted up into the air where they can dry out terribly effectively.
So if there's one group that needs your attention now, it's baskets and pots. In the heat of summer, death is never very far away.
Baskets can go from perky to poorly in a matter of days, and it's no use blaming the weather or God, because as far as baskets are concerned, you're playing God. It's all down to you.
They need the right food and water at the right time to thrive, so I've set up one of my experiments to prove the point.
The first patient will be getting a balanced diet. Lots of water, lots of food. In other words, plenty of everything for him. You'll be fine. This basket, on the other hand, we're going to be mean to. We're not going to give it any food, and we're only going to give it water when it gets thirsty and starts to wilt. So we'll call this one no liquids, though we're not going to be quite that mean to it, but fairly. Patient number 3 will be getting no solids. Lots of liquid, but no food at all. So we'll call him no solids. Nurse?
Each basket will be dead-headed as it grows to encourage new flowers. But other than that, we'll let nature take her course and see what happens in a matter of weeks. And to be honest, it won't take that long for some of them. This really is a delicate balance. In fact, even after 4 weeks, some evidence is pretty clear.
Just look at the no liquids basket, or the not enough liquids basket. Fairly thin, not well furnished, and some of them are starting to die off. They're telling themselves that because there's this little water about, it must be the end of summer. I'd better produce some seeds and die. What a pretty sight.
No solids isn't looking too bad, but then the compost does have some food in it already, which will soon be running out.
And the plenty of everything basket? That's doing as well as expected. But what's going to happen to this trio on into August and beyond?
Ah well, plenty of everything on the left is big with good green leaves and plenty of flowers. All is well. In the no solids basket, the foliage has gone very yellow, a sure sign that the plants are starving. While no liquids is yellow and brown and very sad. R.I.P.
Because the garden's ticking over quite happily now, everything seems to be getting on with it, apart from the odd prod and a poke, you might think you've really got nothing to do. But there's one particular job I save for this time of year: taking cuttings.
Taking cuttings from your own tender perennials like geraniums or pelargoniums means you can get more of them without having to venture to the garden centre again next year.
See where I've taken the cutting from, just above a leaf joint, with about that much stem, because the cutting is going to be that little bit in the middle. All I need to do now is get it ready.
Trimming off all the leaves, bar the 2 or 3 at the top, stops the cutting losing too much moisture and focuses its attention on making roots.
Takes me back, this time was when I was in my teens working on the nursery. I used to help take 15,000 geranium cuttings every summer, and you'd end up with a black groove down the middle of your thumb.
I'm executive now, I don't get the black groove. It's important that the cut at the bottom of the stem is just below a leaf joint, because that's the spot most likely to produce roots. There are a whole host of chemical messages going on in here now. It knows it's been removed from its parent and it's got to try and survive. So what it will do is send messages down to this area here, fractionally below that leaf joint where I made the cut, and it will persuade that to produce roots. It has to. It's its only hope of survival. You can help by giving it good gritty compost, water and an incubator, which helps it hold on to moisture in the early days. And then, hopefully, the chemical magic in that leaf joint kicks in. You get new roots. Do I believe in green fingers? Well, yes I do, because in a way green fingers are born out of experience and aptitude. You learn the best way of rooting things, the best way of doing things. That becomes experience. You get better at it, you get more green-fingered. It's just that in some people the capacity to be green-fingered is rather more deeply buried than in others. I like to think mine are fairly near the surface. You can take cuttings from most plants. Some are just easier than others. Dianthus, pinks and penstemons are good to start on. Alternatively, you can go and wander around someone else's garden for summer inspiration. It's round about now that one of our favourite flowers comes into its own. No garden should be without it. It can fit onto the tiniest patio or fill the largest estate. It's the rose, and the most familiar ones tend to belong to two main groups, hybrid teas and floribundas. You know the sort, big fat flower, popular in parks department bedding, wins prizes at flower shows, and you sometimes see it in tattoos. They're not as popular as they once were. Their habits can be a bit ungainly and lacking in grace, and their flowers too chocolate boxy and hyacinth bouquet for some tastes. So instead, the more old-fashioned, strongly scented shrub roses are enjoying a comeback. As with all shrubs, they're good background plants, but come the end of June and the beginning of July, they burst into bloom and simply knock you between the eyes, and the scents, as with this one here, a hybrid musk called Felicia, are simply overpowering. They come in two basic types, the smaller ones that look at home alongside cottage-style or herbaceous plants, and larger, more wild ones that don't need to be confined to beds and borders. The larger, more vigorous shrub roses are very much at home in a wild garden where they can be left to do their own thing. They don't need very much in the way of pruning, apart from the removal of dead wood and the odd old gnarled stem, and by and large the vast majority of them are pretty disease resistant. You can use them to make informal hedges, or as a backdrop to perennial plants in a flower border. Either way, they'll scent the summer air with their intoxicating fragrance. But however nice someone else's roses are, back at home, I've pruning on my mind. If you were to do a survey of the most frequently asked gardening questions, pretty near the top of the list would be, why won't my wisteria flower? Well, the key to the conundrum is right now in midsummer. You see, wisteria is a peculiar beauty, and in order to get these huge grape-like bunches of flowers cascading from every bough, you need to prune it not once, but twice a year, in July and again in January or February. It doesn't matter where you start, but in order to show you the early results, I'll start back in February. Ours was a huge tangled mass of stems. Hopefully yours won't look quite this bad.
But if yours has never been pruned, or you've hacked at it rather tentatively and it's galloping for the gutters, then this site is probably all too familiar. All these long stems were behind that downpipe. If I'd left them there, they would have swollen over the years and pushed that thing completely off the wall. We don't need as many as this. I want to try and get the plant to go round the corner and furnish the other wall, but not with all these. We can reduce them by at least half.
Then, along the new main framework of stems, shorten each of the side shoots to about 3 or 4 inches, and it'll become a flowering spur.
That's what we're after. You see these little fat buds here? Those are the ones that are going to be flowers, and it's those that you can cut back to. You've got a nice little finger there that's just going to cascade with fragrant blooms in May.
Those old spurs need to go back to about 3 or 4 buds while you're at it. And then, by shortening those side shoots to make more spurs and trimming back the existing ones, I reckon we got double the number of flowers, easily. But you can get even more if come July your wisteria gets another haircut.
Those long whippy growths up there that we no longer need to extend the territory of the plant because it's covering quite enough wall can come off now, because if we leave them on, they'll just lash around all through autumn and winter, doing no good at all.
Cut them back to about 1 foot in length. Then you'll prevent them from extending further and persuade them to start producing flower buds. These are the stems that'll shorten to 3 or 4 inches come February.
There are lots of myths attached to wisteria. One of them is that they don't flower for 7 years after you plant them. Well, that might have been true in the old days when you were planting rather dubious flowering varieties of Chinese wisteria. But nowadays, if you want to make sure you can get flowers even from the first year onwards, look for a grafted plant. Go into your garden centre and you will see at the very bottom of wisteria plants a great sort of thumb thing of the rootstock, and then the grafted bit of a proven flowering variety growing out of the top of it. And with one of those, you know it'll flower, well, at least in its second year. It's one of those lovely jobs that you feel incredibly virtuous when you get to the end of. And the other thing is, you know it's money in the bank. It flowered pretty well last year. Think what it's going to be like next year.
Now, I know I said that high summer was the time for relaxing in your garden, and I know too that we haven't actually done it yet, but there's one more job that we must do to keep everything bubbling along nicely.
I said at the beginning that to get your plants through the summer successfully, you have to give them what they want. And we couldn't get to the end of July without mentioning watering.
Does this method look familiar?
So this is what you do then, isn't it? You get out with your hose and your sprinkler head of an evening when it's nice and cool and you spray your plants. Well, no, because where's the water going? It's going direct onto the foliage. Look at these heleniums, all bowed down with the weight of the water. You're in danger of snapping the stems off and, more importantly, not getting the water to where it's needed, which is at the roots, not on the foliage. I've sunk a little jam jar in here just to show how much water is reaching the soil. You'll be surprised. Very, very little. So what's the answer? Take the sprinkler head off the hose and put the hose pipe right down by the roots where it can do some good.
You'll have to stand for some time, longer than you'd think you should, because the water needs to penetrate deep into the soil.
If you only water the top inch or so, you'll encourage surface rooting, and in the next drought, they'll be left high and dry.
But water deeply and the roots will follow. How deeply?
Well, look, if it's as moist as that, 4 inches down, then you're absolutely fine. And you really only need to worry about watering plants that have just gone in this year. If they're long established, make them look for it.
The mix of good watering, good soil, good food and the right timing has worked wonders on this new mixed border. I said it was looking promising at the start, but look at the growth it's put on this month. And the newcomers are doing well too.
The dahlias are starting to come into their own, but there's still loads more to come. Asters, more dahlias down there. I'd give this border 7 out of 10 now. In another month, full marks.
Elsewhere in the garden, the cottage border's recovering nicely. The alchemilla's doing well, and the geraniums that are hacked back are quite close to flowering again. But the star for me has to be that patio area and its pots. It's all just erupted in colour.
But the bed itself, which was only planted up 2 months ago, is very pretty. There's that coreopsis called moonbeam, delicious pale yellow, delicate foliage, and an nemesia, aptly named confetti, a sprinkling of pale pink flowers all over it. But the thing about this bed is it not only looks good, it smells wonderful too.
We've achieved our first objective of high summer gardening, to plan and plant new colour that stretches the firework display well into the autumn.
But for now, put down your secateurs, sit back and enjoy the view. There's only one more thing to do. You didn't think it was real, did you?
Next time, autumn brings seeds, grasses at their peak, and misty, mellow fruitfulness.